Hello and welcome to the fourth and final installment of the Hudson Institute's Olympics Boycott series. I'm Nina Shea, and I am a senior scholar at the Hudson Institute, and I direct the Center for Religious Freedom, which is sponsoring this series. For the fourth installment, we're going to be looking at how China is using organ harvesting as a tool of repression against its religious minorities. And I have with me today two of the foremost experts in the world on this issue. I'd like to welcome David Kilgore and David Matas, who are both joining me from Canada today. And David Kilgore is a former Canadian cabinet minister, a member of parliament, a prosecutor, lawyer, author, columnist, human rights advocate. And David Matas is also an international human rights lawyer, an author and researcher based in Winnipeg, and currently acts as the senior honorary counsel for B'nai B'rith in Canada. He has served the government of Canada in numerous positions, including as a member of the Canadian delegation to a UN International Criminal Court. And more importantly, for today's purposes, both of these gentlemen have authored a path-breaking book on this issue of organ harvesting in China called Bloody Harvest. And they came out with it in 2006 and have added to it and revised it and issued a book on it over the past 15 years or so, along with Ethan Gutmann, a journalist who we had in speaking with us on the cover-up in China of human rights abuses, Ethan Gutmann. So welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here, Nina.
Thank you. You came to the conclusion that very early on in 2006, that the source for most of the massive volume of organs for transplants is the killing of innocents, of Uyghur Muslims, of Tibetan Buddhists, of house Christians, and primarily practitioners of the spiritually based set of exercises, Falun Gong. This is absolutely horrifying and shocking, and I'd really like to do a deep dive into how you came to this conclusion. And David Kilgore, maybe you could start with really telling our viewers about how you stumbled on this issue, how you came across this obscure issue that was hidden by the government of China, of course, and that even today, many of us in the West are just learning about.
Well, briefly, Nina, in 1992, there were virtually no Falun Gong in China. It was started by a Mr. Lee, Master Lee, they call it, in 1992. And by the end of the 90s, there were between 70 and 100 million practitioners. Every street in every city in China, even at the Chinese consulate in New York, they allowed them to do the exercises. The government encouraged them to do what they were doing because they were healthy exercises. They didn't smoke or drink. They were nonviolent. They believed in truth. That's one of the things that got them into trouble. But the government actually encouraged them. But and you want to pick it up, David, from there, 99?
Yes, well, they were repressed or not officially banned, but by the party repressed in 1999 because they had become so popular, the party feared for its own ideological supremacy. There was a woman with a pseudonym Annie in 2006 who made a public statement in Washington, D.C. that her ex-husband was a transplant surgeon and that he had been transplanting organs of Falun Gong practitioners into his patients, that the Falun Gong practitioners were killed through organ extraction and their bodies were cremated. The Chinese government immediately rejected what Annie said. There was an NGO in Washington, D.C., the Coalition to Investigate Persecution Against Falun Gong, who wanted to set up a human rights investigation and had a list of 20 names. They came to David Kilgour, who said, well, I can't work with 20 people, but I can work with David Matus. So, that's how we got involved.
Yeah, so your reputation as human rights experts, your positions in the Canadian government probably all attracted them, and you know, when they went to you for help. So how does it work? Can you briefly describe and walk us through the process of what this means, organ harvesting? I mean, we've heard of organ transplants. Number of organs can be transplanted in the United States. I think we have a waiting list of 4 years for a kidney transplant, that, according to NIH, National Institute of Health database. And how does it work in China?
I'll speak about Annie, David. You can pick it up about the hospitals and so on. Is that okay, Nina?
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to add something to the Annie story, yeah.
Well, yeah, Annie was the one who was in Washington with her husband. Her husband was a cornea transplant specialist. And as I recall, he took out, I know it's staggering, but I think it was 3,000 corneas from Falun Gong practitioners in a place called Sujiatan, China. They were brought from the prison up to his operating room. He took out the corneas, then their bodies were taken into other rooms, and then all their other organs were taken out, and of course their bodies were then burned. But 3,000, and he ended up getting a lot of money for that. And finally, he was having nightmares, he couldn't sleep, and finally the two of them left China, and he went to one country and she went to another country. She couldn't abide what he was doing, I gather, so that's one of the reasons they split up.
Yeah, so that is, in a sense, that's encouraging, and you that you heard the witness of a doctor and his wife, and there's many survivors in the sense that they were in detention. These are Falun Gong practitioners who were picked up for their practicing of the spiritual exercises and a membership, and they were then put in detention, where were they put?
Well,
David
that's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
There was no charge, no hearing, no appeal. A policeman just simply said, Nina, you're going to this work camp over here. You're a prisoner of conscience, of course. And you waited working 16 hours a day. We've heard from people who managed to get out. They made things like toys for America and Canada. It was just nauseating.
Yeah.
And then one day somebody would come in, would seize them, give them a little potassium, and then their organs would be taken out and their bodies would be burned. That's how the rule of law works in China in terms of getting organs. It's
been described as a perfect crime because there actually aren't any survivors of that, of what you just described. But there were survivors, David Matus, of the detention camps who were able to be released at some point. And can you tell us about what they were saying?
Well, pretty systematically, because we interviewed a lot of different people who got out of detention and out of China, both Falun Gong practitioners and common criminals. And what they both told us was that the Falun Gong practitioners would be systematically blood tested and organ examined. The common criminals would not be. At the time, they had no idea what was going on, and it didn't hurt them, and it wasn't really something that concerned them that much. They just noticed the difference. But we also heard from prisoners. I mean, some of them, not the Falun Gong, but the common criminal prisoners would see funny things going on. Like what they would see is what David Kilgour mentioned, that a Falun Gong practitioner would be taken out of their cell and injected with potassium, and then they'd be taken to a white van. We've also heard anecdotally from other people, the people who are running some of this system, that in the white van, organs would be extracted. Now, sometimes the organ extraction would actually happen in the hospital, but often it would just be in the white van, and then the organs would be transplanted to the hospital, so that the extraction team and the insertion team would be different. And there, on the global side, there was a mass public advertising and brokerage. I mean, when we first started, price lists were posted. There was advertising in different languages around the world, and it was a and still is a multi-billion-dollar business.
Well, I remember, if I could just interject there on something point you made, is the advertising. And in your reports, you have some samples of that. And one was just so shocking, and it popped out at me, was an advertisement saying it was, I guess, directed at Japanese prospective patients, and saying, come to China to get your transplant, come to our hospital because we used fresh organs, we use live organs, that these are much better than live sources, live donors, they're much better than cadavers, much more effective. I mean, and that is, you got that from an archive, I guess. Once you started writing about all this and testifying, China started getting wise, and the hospitals or the government started taking down these websites or these ads. But you do have samples of that, which was absolutely stunning. You also say that there were, just to give a sense of Falun Gong's repression after 1999 or 2000, you say that in the work camps in your report, Bloody Harvest, that it's estimated between 500,000 and 1 million in the year 2000 were in the work camps being punished. And these are camps where, David Kilgore, you mentioned, no due process, no right of appeal. They are basically out of sight. They don't have visitors, they don't have lawyers. So they're very vulnerable to this kind of abuse. Everybody is actually in these prisons, are extremely vulnerable. And so there's every opportunity, if China wants to disappear someone, no one really knows about it or can protest it. And those who do make appeals, what happened to them? Those who appealed to the public security about their loved ones missing, they went missing too.
Go ahead, jump in, David, if you like.
Yes, well, absolutely. And one of the chilling facts, I appreciate what you say about advertising of fresh organs, but one of the other chilling facts is that transplant patients could book on a fixed date a transplant in advance of vital organs, heart, liver, lungs, where obviously somebody was being killed for their organs. And this is what alerted a number of doctors worldwide to the fact that something very odd was going on.
Your report was absolutely amazing because you really did give an education in organ transplants. I learned a lot about the mechanics of it just from reading it. And you make the point that I think it was there's 5 hours. You have a 5-hour window to make a transplant for a kidney and maybe or a heart, and maybe for a kidney it's a little longer. But you're talking about a day and a half at most for the interval between excising someone's organs and putting them in another body. And to have advertisements attracting customers or patients, customers and patients, and they show up, and then within a day or a couple of weeks, they have the perfect match. They have an organ. And this is happening, as you said, in large numbers, great volumes. And so how did you, I'm curious, because we did have our part 2 of the series discussing with Ethan Gutman and others, discussing the cover-up of the Chinese government. Of course, there's no transparency in these prisons or hospitals. How did you determine this? Tell us about your database and what are the kinds of things you looked at? Go ahead, David.
People prefer anecdotes, but here's an anecdote that's true. We found one person from a country in Asia. I won't mention the country. I don't think it matters. And he went for a kidney to China. And the doctor who came in to look at him was wearing a military uniform, which was rather bizarre, I thought, but he was a surgeon. And he did the blood test, the things you have to do. And then he went away and came back with a kidney. And I talked to this man himself, because he's doing fine now, I think. But listen to what happened. The first kidney didn't work. So the military doctor went away and came back with another kidney a couple of hours later. And that didn't work either. A third one was brought, didn't work. The fourth one, he actually had to go back to his country for a few months and came back. The fourth kidney worked. But as you can well appreciate, 4 people died in order that he got a good kidney, because as I think you understand, Nina, they take all the organs. They don't just take one kidney like they do in some places. They take all the organs. So 4 people died so that this man could get a good kidney. Isn't that incredible?
It's incredible. So the numbers, it's very hard to make estimates, but it's much understated. Whatever you say is probably much understated. Your report gleaned the medical literature in China, the speeches of doctors, of medical personnel, how many beds. You looked at the beds, the number of beds in the hospitals, the number of patients, and you made a calculation of about, I guess it was 60 to 90,000 a year organ transplants a year. But it's probably much higher than that from what you're saying, because that doesn't take into consideration the failed organs and the trial and error that they have.
Yeah, in terms of evidentiary trails, there was a number of them. One of them was these blood testing and organ examination. There was also the phone calls of our investigators to hospitals pretending to be relatives of patients needing transplants, asking the hospitals if they had organs of Falun Gong for sale on the basis that Falun Gong exercise and they're healthy and their organs are healthy. And we have a tape, transcribed, translated recordings throughout China saying, yes, we do, come on down. There's the huge volume of transplants with no other obvious explanation for sources. When we started, China did not have a donation system. You couldn't donate an organ even if you wanted to, unless it was a near relative. Even now, donations are tiny. They have set up a donation system. China originally said everything was coming from donations, even though they didn't have a donation system, which was obviously a false explanation. Then they said everything was coming from prisoners sentenced to death and then executed who donated their organs to atone for their crimes, but they wouldn't release death penalty figures. And the death penalty numbers would have had to been 10 times what the NGOs estimated would be. So there was no other identifiable source for the organs. And then, of course, there was this evidence of organs available on demand, including vital organs booked in advance. There's the extreme vilification of Falun Gong, the prolonged arbitrary.
Yeah, let's hold that for a second, because I think that's a very important discussion that I just want to explore what you're saying first, so we can all sort of understand how you reach this this startling conclusion that this is happening in large numbers. You mentioned that the NGOs, David Matus, were saying that the number was much smaller for death row prisoners, and I think Amnesty said that in 1 year it was around 1,000 or 1,500, and then another year later on it went up a bit, and it was a lot. It went up to 7,000 or 8,000 death row prisoners a year in China, and China was maintaining that this was the source, their execution was the source for needy patients for their organs. And that is, not all of those could be used. I mean, that's pretty implausible. David Kilgore, jump in.
At one point, we were told, David will recall this too, I think, that there were 57 offenses in China for which you could get capital punishment, even down to tax evasion was one of the 57. So now it's true that they've gone down, I believe, in recent years substantially, but still 57 offenses. So that was the time when they were taking the organs from Falun Gong. They later started doing it, as we may have time to talk about the Uyghurs, but this is what I'm talking about, the period when the Falun Gong was probably the main source of organs.
Well, also there was this coincidence or this coterminous massive arrests of Falun Gong with a mushrooming of the transplant industry in China, with a large number of hospitals being built that you showed, when they were built, and you were meticulous in the research for Bloody Harvest about, the number of hospitals, the number of beds. Let's discuss for a minute the actors. Who's involved in this industry? I mean, how do the organs get allocated? How do the prisoners, I mean, these are basically what we're talking about now is prisoners of conscience in labor camps and prisons and the Laogai. Maybe they're in basements, maybe they're in black jails, and very large numbers of them. And they're being blood tested. You described that they're being blood tested and their organs are being checked, maybe through sonogram or through some other screening method. They're the right age, and they're in healthy condition. And so they're late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s. And they suddenly end up in a hospital on a transplant operating table, getting their organs excised against their will. So that is the picture. And how does this happen? Who are the actors here who is performing these transplants, who's allocating these organs, who's allocating these prisoners, who's saying these are the prisoners? Can you explain that?
I mean, everywhere else, there's a shortage of organs, and organs are allocated depending on priorities. But in China, the whole system was run as if there was an inexhaustible supply of organs, so that a customer wanted an organ, a patient from abroad wanted an organ, they got it immediately. All they had to show up and pay the money. And they could go almost anywhere in China, and that would happen. So there was a network. I mean, this is, I mean, you talk about cover up, but this is one of the issues, that the whole system is compartmentalized. And everybody could pretend to be woefully blind to the other components of the system. And so you had the brokers and the patients selling the organs. You had the insertion team, the extraction team, you had the testing team, the jailers would know who the Falun Gong people were, and they could point, the jailers could point the testers and the extractors to the Falun Gong patients, but the testers and extractors could say, we don't know who they were. The reason that Annie's husband found out who they were is one of the patients that he was extracting an organ from was wearing a Falun Gong symbol. And that's how he's able to figure out what was going on.
And he worked for, did he work for the People's Liberation Army military?
Well, he was in a Sujiatan hospital. I don't know if that was a military hospital, no.
Because your report says that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army General Logistics Office is the one responsible for organ allocation. They're the ones that find out who's where and And I guess maybe it varies. I mean, it's very hard to understand because it is a tangled web. But I think that the military has an instrumental part, and many of these hospitals, these transplant hospitals, and you have amazing photographs in your report. I really commend the report to everyone when it's online. And probably your book is available at Amazon, I would imagine. These are gigantic, modern, state-of-the-art military hospitals, and most of the bulk of the transplants were started there.
I mean, the military in China is a conglomerate business, and this is one of their ways of making money. There is an allocation system that the Chinese government has set up now, but you can't see it. I mean, they advertise it, and they've got a website, but you can't see anything about what's going on. I should say also about the death penalty, the Chinese law says somebody has to be executed within 7 days of sentence. And so that was another reason why the death penalty people, aside from the numbers, weren't even really usable for transplants, because transplants can't be organized that quickly. There was a UN rapporteur, Manfred Nowak, who went to a UN rapporteur in Turkey, who went to visit China. China allowed him in, and he says, "I'd like to see your death penalty holding cells." They said, "We don't have any because everybody's killed right after sentence." So it's just the death penalty really wasn't a viable option.
Yeah, and I guess what China does is they have the demands, and then they find a supply, or the supply is driven by the demand. And in the United States or the West, it's the opposite, where it's the supply of organs is then you try to find the patient who needs it.
Well, it's another facet of the system that China shifted from socialism to capitalism, which meant that it withdrew money from the public sector, including the health sector. And as a result, the Chinese hospitals had to find other sources of income. And the selling of transplants became the main source of income, and it allowed them basically to keep their doors open. But once they got onto the source of revenue, they realized how profitable it was and went way beyond just using it to keep the doors open. They expanded tremendously based on that.
Yeah, so they found a way to monetize the repression, that these were a targeted group to begin with. They were in the labor camps to begin with, and they could just use them as a living organ bank. And I think you quoted one of the witnesses as saying that this was like or maybe I read it elsewhere, it's like a natural resource for them, was these prisoners.
Yeah.
David Kilgore, did you want to add something?
Well, yeah, the way it works, when we've talked to a lot of people, patients, prisoners, and so on, is where are the patients coming from? I think it's about 8 countries have stopped allowing their citizens to go for organ tourism, as they call it. And then, by the way, Nina, as you know, there's only one country in the world where the system is run by the government, and that's, of course, China. People say, well, I can go to this country or that country for an organ. Yes, if they do, it's illegal and it's done in a back alley, and the doctor who does it can go to jail in most cases for doing it. But in China, of course, it's a big business. And something David said was about, I know one case where a boy was hurt in an accident of some kind. He went to a hospital in East, one of the hospitals, and was told unless his father could pay for the medical treatment, he wouldn't get treatment. He couldn't, he didn't have the money, so the boy was thrown out of the hospital. That's how inhuman their so-called medical system is now in China.
So we have in the actors, the range of actors in this horrific, ghastly, immoral operation of the organ transplant are the police who arrest, well, the government who orders that demonized and ordered the elimination of Falun Gong.
You mentioned at the 510 office, the 510 office runs the system.
610, yeah, the 610.
610.
So then you had the 610 office within the government, within the CP, the Communist Party, running this operation of arrest and eliminating Falun Gong, which was the directive back in 1999 or so from the president of the country to eliminate Falun Gong, was the actual quote of Jiang Zemin. You have the prison system that's running these Lao guys, these labor camps or prisons or detention camps or black jails, various places where they have no due process. You have the prison operation. Then you have the allocators, whether it's some national system now or whether it's a local allocation with the monopoly over the organs by the local hospitals, finding them through the prisons. There's an interaction between the prisons and the medical establishment. And the medical establishment is in about, 800 transplant centers throughout the country that you documented that are making money off this whole deal, but they are private and military hospitals, overseen, I guess, by the party or the state-run, party-run state. What are the medical personnel, the doctors? I mean, you told us about Annie's husband, who his conscience didn't let him continue. He was appalled. You have testimony from other doctors cheerfully saying that they're selling Falun Gong organs. What are these doctors thinking? They're just seeing the dollar signs? I mean, I would think that there may be some, and I think some have been documented. Matthew Robertson, I think, documented some, that there was an overlap from the transplant surgeons who were also part of the anti-Falun Gong campaign on behalf of the party. Can you give your insights into the range of actors and what were the medical, and then don't forget the foreign medical personnel, the foreign transplant medical establishment who really helped to train at least the first generation of these transplant doctors in China. If you could just each give me some insights on this.
David Matus is a student of the Holocaust, and of course we've just celebrated, memorialized International Holocaust Days. Please go first, David.
Well, sure. I mean, this gets back to the point I was making earlier about vilification and from the Falun Gong practitioners we talked to who got out of jail and out of prison and obviously weren't organ harvested. Their jailers would tell them, "You're not a person. We can do anything we want with you. If you don't do what we want, you're going to be killed for your organs," all this sort of stuff. And that attitude, I mean, even though Falun Gong were totally innocent, the Chinese communist propaganda was so effective to the people who ran the system, which is of course something we saw with the Nazis as well, that, I mean, the Nazis didn't see Jews as persons, the communists didn't see Falun Gong as persons. And it's this dehumanization, this depersonalization that made it easier for them to do it.
Mm-hmm. And there may be various motives too, so that you have some who want to see a happy coincidence between money making and eliminating the Falun Gong. And I really think that this kind of deductive reasoning is used now in the identification of genocide of the Uyghur minority, the Uyghur Muslim minority, that they saw that there was a dearth of population growth, a plummeting of population growth, and that there was these people coming out of those camps, also vast concentration camps network up over in Xinjiang, saying that they had been forcibly sterilized or forced to undergo abortions or forced, to birth control, or their children have been taken away from them by the hundreds of thousands. So it's you can make similar. I mean, you're not going to have China coming forward and saying, come into our hospitals and take a look, come into the military hospital. This is a secret. This is secret information, apparently. It's secret both how many transplants they're doing. You had to piece that together from various sources, as we discussed, but from the hospital's own advertisements or medical journals. And it's secret how many executions or what their sources are, how many prisoners are being executed, and it's secret what their actual sources are. I mean, they're saying now that it's completely voluntary. Isn't that their position at this point, the CCP?
Well, I can jump in on that, David. Dr. Toti is a Uyghur, and he's now living outside of China. He fled the country, but he explains that in 1995, I think it was, he was taken to an execution ground as a doctor. They heard a shot. He went over to the so-called condemned man, discovered he'd been shot in the left-hand side of his chest, and missed the heart. That he was to miss the heart, and so he removed his heart and other organs, put them in his van, and took them back to the Urumqi, the capital. So it actually started with the Uyghurs before the Falun Gong, as far as we can determine. And they have as you know, I'm sure, Nina, they have something like 12 million people, Uyghurs, who've all been DNA tested. Why would you DNA test 12 million people?
Well, actually, Ethan Gutman was in part 2, and he said that that's actually a misnomer. They may have DNA tested them, but they also did blood tests. And Good point. Did that to, they believe to put them in a government database for organ transplants.
Yeah, of course, for transplants, you need blood type compatibility and ideally tissue type compatibility. So this testing was used to match the people in detention with the patients who arrived. And we hear stories from patients of doctors who come with lists from these prisons of the blood types and tissue types and match them with the patient in the hospital. In terms of voluntariness, sure, the Chinese government says it's all voluntary. Donation system, which exists now, it doesn't produce big numbers. They also say it's accident victims who are brain dead, cardiac alive, and their families agree. But the trouble with that suggestion is, first of all, you can't coordinate an accident with a patient's arrival. So you can't book a transplant.
Because of the short timeline of the organ, what is usability of the organs after they're cut off from their blood supply.
I mean, if somebody's in an accident so bad that they're brain dead, a lot of their rest of the body is going to be damaged as well. So I mean, they're just grasping at straws to try to explain the numbers because they don't want to really explain the numbers.
Yeah, I think that there was one assessment that the Chinese government now is saying that it's not Falun Gong, it's not the prisoners of conscience, it's not prisoners at all, it's not it's citizens and citizens who voluntarily donate. And there was a medical backlash to that in some quarters in the world, saying they've changed the name. They've changed the name from they're playing with semantics, that they're saying that these these prisoners of conscience are citizens and that they're voluntarily giving them. But I think that during COVID, it opened up China's reaction and response to this pandemic. Once it became known inside of China before anybody anywhere else, it opened a lot of people's eyes to how this government cannot be believed, and nor can sometimes they're very effective in manipulating the views of doctors and internationally, and also of WHO, the World Health Organization.
Oh, boy.
And that's a fascinating story too, about the task force that actually a doctor, a Chinese transplant doctor who was vice minister of their Ministry of Health, which played a major role in this whole transplant, industry in China, named Wang Jiefu. He proposed the creation of this WHO task force. He then and received applause from various influential people, and then served on it himself. And it seems like he has propagandized them. He has really played a role in minimizing this. He was saying one thing one year, another thing another year, promising that it was all prisoners were no longer being used after 2015, then hinting that, well, maybe they still are being used. This is really an outrage that this has been allowed to go on. I'm wondering if you had the task force was, I think, mandated to examine the practices in major transplant countries. Did they call on you, or did you have an opportunity to brief them on your findings? I mean, you were the foremost experts in the world on the transplant industry and the hospitals involved, even the government actors involved, and even the testimony of doctors and survivors.
David, sorry, David. Oh, sorry.
But
David,
go ahead.
Can you explain what you and Erwin wrote in the Globe briefly?
Well, yeah, I mean, this task force, it was really a cosmetic effort to paper over what China is doing. They didn't contact us, and they didn't really address the information that we marshaled. It was an attempt to use or abuse an international organization, not on the basis of any investigation or any substantive report, but just to use and misuse the name of an international organization to continue the cover-up.
Mm-hmm. It was a preemptive strike by China, I guess, to get control of it so that there would be a real investigation.
Yeah, I mean, there was, I mean, aside from the work that David Kilgore and Ethan Gutman and I have done, there was this NGO that the three of us established, the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, struck a independent tribunal to look at all the evidence from which, I mean, it was independent from us, we just testified. And they came to the conclusion that this was happening beyond a reasonable doubt. So yeah,
that was you're referring to the China Tribunal, which came out with their finding, their judgment in 2020, and said that this undoubtedly is happening. I just want to stick on this task force for a minute, because this just Chinese Vice Minister of Health at the time, Ministry of Health, now Ministry of Health and Family Planning or something. His name is Wang, H-U-A-N-G, Jiefu. He was actually in the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And he was in the Central Committee as an alternate for about 10 years, from between 1997 and 2002, and then again from 2002 to 2007. And I found that information on the Carnegie Endowment for Peace website. They have a China Vitae, sort of like a Wikipedia, but they put it together themselves of putting people's bios in China as a way of helping Americans and others, Canadians and others navigate the system in China, so that they can have counterparts to talk to and deal with. So that is an amazing thing that he is on the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party was for many years, and is out there, really blindsiding the other members of that committee, and they're trusting him, and they in turn are receiving awards. The head of that committee that was so blind, I think it's blindsided. That's my view, and I surmise that from the very fact that they didn't take your work seriously and were rather indifferent to the whole issue. Dismissed it out of hand, I think is how Matthew Robertson described it in his report for the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. The head of that committee, the chair of that committee, is a Harvard professor and a Mass General transplant surgeon, Francis Delmonico. And he himself, I think, was awarded something by the Vatican for his work on that. And he is now a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. In fact, they liked what he was doing on I guess on this transplant committee so much that they brought him in. So I think it's horrific that there was this incredible naivety or willing blindness to absolutely horrific, shocking abuse of medicine. And you raised, David Matus, the China Tribunal. So this was a tribunal that was established internationally in the UK and chaired by it's a People's Tribunal with some very distinguished members. The chair was the same, Sir Geoffrey Nice, who is the same chair as the Uyghur Tribunal, which came out with its determination just a couple months ago that there was genocide of the Uyghurs. Now they found that Falun Gong was, that this was happening to prisoners of conscience, this organ harvesting, that the Falun Gong, as you did, were, unequivocally, they found that they were victimized by this. And they said it was a crime against humanity, but that there was no intent to determine whether it was genocide. And of course, genocide under the UN Convention requires both a physical destruction in part, at least, in part or in whole of a group, but it also requires intent. And here we have, the statement of the president, Jiang Zemin at the time, saying, eliminate them. They create this massive infrastructure to carry this out, the 610 office, to eliminate them. You do have to use deductive reasoning to say, well, maybe they used not a gas chamber, not a firing squad, but maybe they used this organ transplant, and they found a way to make money doing it at the same time. It's just, it's stunning that there would not be, I think that, there are two pieces of this that I think are new, and since they made their finding in 2020, and that is something that you found. One is what I had mentioned previously about the more openness to understanding what China's all about from the COVID experience, that there is sort of the blinkers or the scales are falling from one's eyes when we start to recognize how there's a deeply dishonest and immoral thing at work in the CCP, in the Chinese Communist Party attitudes and values. And then there's something else, and that is that the UN special rapporteurs, 12 of them, came together last year and said that they found that they were alarmed by credible evidence that these religious minorities, including Falun Gong, and including the Uyghurs, including house church Christians, including Tibetan Buddhists, were being typed or examined physically against their will in detention, and their blood was being taken and entered into government databases, consistent with organ typing. And two, and this was really, I think, very, very essential point, that and you found this as well, that no one else in the prisons were undergoing that they interviewed other prisoners and they were not. So those, in prison who may be young people and healthy, even though they had very lucrative organs too, they were not being blood sampled or tissue typed for possible transplants. And I think that it's time to revisit this and for the world to come out and recognize what this is about. But let me turn it over to you with your reflections on all of this. And I know, and by the way, I know you had a list of recommendations in your report. Maybe you could talk about that as well.
Yeah, I'll just make a few points, and I'll maybe let my colleague conclude. First of all, I appeared in Congress before a committee with Francis Delmonico, and he was asked about his statements about Falun Gong and organ harvesting, and he says, and he was asked, what do your investigations show? And he says, I don't investigate, that's not my job. So his conclusions really aren't based on research. In terms of
and by the way, I don't think that's true. I looked at the mandate, the UN mandate for that task force, and they were to examine the systems, transplant systems in various countries.
Well, true or not, that's what he said. In terms of genocide, I've co-written an article with a couple of others in the Journal of Genocide Studies describing the killing of Falun Gong for their organs as cold genocide, meaning it's taken place over a long period of time. So there's a lot of evidence of that. And the China Tribunal didn't say it wasn't, they weren't sure, so they left it open. In terms of the Uyghurs, I mean, they have basically, in terms of numbers, replaced in large measure Falun Gong, because over the course of 15 years, the huge detention of Falun Gong, the numbers have depleted because of these mass killings. And we now have airport lanes in Xinjiang airports, which have signs on them saying for transportation of organs, which are being transported throughout China. In terms of COVID, I don't think it just makes us more skeptical, but I also think it makes us aware that we're not immune everywhere to what happens in China. I mean, COVID started in China, spread throughout the world, and we still don't have a clear picture of what happened in China that started it. So those are the remarks I wanted to make, and I'll leave you to finish off, David.
Well, I agree with everything you've just said, David. The problem is, where do we go from here? And some countries, as you know, Nina, have said that they will not allow somebody to bring something in from Xinjiang because of the enormous evidence we have that forced labor is being used there of the Uyghurs.
By the way, that's another example of monetizing repression, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, exactly. Why are we buying Volkswagen cars, for example, which are in large numbers made in Xinjiang, given the history of Volkswagen in Germany? I mean, this is crazy. We protested in front of a Volkswagen dealership here in Ottawa a few months ago. One of the people finally came out of the sales agency, and we got to talking, and he said, well, do you make cars in Canada? No, we don't make a single part in Canada. All of our Volkswagens are made outside of Canada. I mean, how can any self-respecting American, or I think they do make some cars in the United States, I should be fair on that, but how can a Canadian buy a Volkswagen car that in all likelihood is being made by forced labor by a Uyghur boy or girl or man or woman for nothing, working 16 hours a day to make cars that get shipped all over China and all over the world? Madness.
So are you saying
many other companies at the Olympics who are doing similar things that we should be taking a stand on? This wonderful basketball player you've got at the Boston Celtics, he's my hero. I just every time I see him, I want to hug him.
Mr. Freedom, yeah.
Oh.
Cantor Freedom, yeah.
Cantor Freedom.
He's very courageous, and so is the Women's Tennis Association too, standing up for the tennis player. But so what you're suggesting then is possibly bans, government bans, and you do suggest it in your report on organs going to, at a minimum, going to China to get a transplant.
Yes, of course. And I'm embarrassed that Canada still hasn't passed legislation to do that. I think it's about, David, 8 or 9 other countries have done it.
Yeah, there's a few, but not enough.
No.
I would say, sure, criminalize transplant tourism into China, but also I think we should stop cooperation, collaboration, joint research, honorary doctorates, exchanges, training, anything that connects the external system with the Chinese transplant system.
Yeah. And you had a meticulous research about the combing through the different medical journals and hospital websites and finding some of the universities like Harvard or University of Pittsburgh or other universities here in the United States and around the world who are have joint projects or who have exchanges or have training for transplant surgeons in China. And they have to wake up and understand what's going on there. And I guess it's this is why I think that some of us feel that doctors these transplant doctors may not be at all appropriate. They have a conflict of interest from being part of these oversight bodies like the task force for the WHO or even on the Uyghur tribunal, it seems that, or the China tribunal rather, that there may be conflicts of interest. There's so much collaboration and cooperation, and some of it's good, but in medicine with China, but this is getting to be an extremely horrifying scenario that you have drawn. And that continues. I mean, there's no evidence that they've stopped. And like you said, that they are now shifting to the Uyghur Muslims, maybe still using Falun Gong, but organs, but also mining those from the, harvesting those from the massive detention camps in Xinjiang. Again, which are secret and no one can go in and there's no assurance of their security at all.
Nina, can David tell you what happened with the meeting with the Canadian Medical Association last week? We were representing something like, was it 260 doctors, David, who had signed on with our letter?
No, I think it was 560.
Oh, so 500.
And tell us about that.
Well, basically they said that they agreed with everything we said, but it's already their adopted position, so they weren't going to issue a statement on it.
Okay, well. And so your research can be found, again, remind our viewers, on your website, endtransplantabuse.org, O-R-G. Is that correct? Did I get that? That's
right. End transplant abuse is all one word.
All one word.
I have a website too, david-kilgore.com. It's got a section on the Uyghurs, and it's and then Falun Gong. It's got a lot of stuff. And I try to get just stuff people like you write and put it up there.
So you've been updating. I know that David Matus has told me that you've been updating this website and both websites all along. So your reports span from 2006 to 2017, but you've been updating it since then.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So this has been your work is just so admirable. I really do appreciate it, and I hope our viewers do. I hope they look it up. I want to thank you both for joining me today. And this concludes our Boycott Olympics series at the Hudson Institute. And if you would like to review any of this 4 parts, you can find them on www.hudson.org/events. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nina.
Thank you.